Welcome to Mind Ministry. Today we have a really hot topic, so you cannot go anywhere. Sit down, let your friends know we are on like every Wednesday at 8 o'clock here at Mind Ministry. We will bring you the hot topic, so you cannot miss out. What's the hot topic today? PTSD. PTSD. I'm sorry about that. What is it? Who gets it? What are the myths? We got to talk about it. Let's talk about it. Today we have a special program. But before I introduce our special guest, I want to remind you to make sure to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and make sure you subscribe to our channel on YouTube. So remember, every Wednesday we go live here on Facebook at 8 o'clock, and we will bring you the hot topics. Now, let me introduce my guest tonight. I'm your host, Francesca Diaz, and today we have a veteran and nurse, the First Lady of Remnant Community Church today. Tracy Glasby is in the house today. Tracy, thank you so much for being here today. And we also have pastor and counselor at Pharaoh's Counseling, Jose Fontanes, with us tonight. So I want to give a shout out over here to everybody that's watching, the team at my ministry as well that are connecting. And Tracy, let everybody know where can we find you and a little bit about yourself. Oh, I think we're having a little bit of technical issues, so we are going to go ahead and start with Pastor and Counselor Jose Fontanes. Jose, go ahead and say hi to everybody tonight.
Hello and blessings to all. Thanking God for this opportunity. Thank you, Francesca, Mind Ministry, for once again allowing me to be part of this program, of this platform, which I think is crucial for the time that we're living in. And it is important for us as the church to be able to speak about these topics and not simply put them to the side. And I thank God for all the people that you have, right, that God has selected and empowered with this knowledge to be able to train the church and lift the church up in these specific areas. So we thank God for that. God has us pastoring here in the city of Hollywood, Florida, in the Sunshine State. Right now, it's not too sunny. It's been raining here constantly for the past few days, but we thank God for that. And also, God allowed us to open up our counseling office here in Hollywood, which we provide counseling for singles, individuals, couples, and families. And we're going to start a group session soon at the end of July in reference to women who have been abused. So we thank God for the doors that he's opening up here in South Florida.
Amen. And thank you, Pastor. Thank you for letting the Lord guide you through such an important subject matter. And thank you for my shirt. I will go wear it. Thank you. Thank you. So listen up, if you are in the area of Hollywood, Florida, or in Florida generally, and you are looking for somewhere to call, perhaps get some help, Pharaoh's Counseling is right there and it's available for you. So make sure to hit us up. Also, Tracy, good to have you back, sister. Please let our people know how you're doing today.
I'm wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It is truly a privilege. It's my pleasure to be a welcome guest. I'm here in the DMV, the Washington, D.C., Virginia area. I am a member of the Remnant Community Church, where my husband is the pastor. He is the senior pastor there. We know that during this time of pandemic, the physical building has been closed, but to God be the glory. We have not missed a beat. We've been live every Wednesday and every Sunday, bringing the word of God, As you've already mentioned, I am a healthcare professional. I am a registered nurse, and actually I am a case manager in the emergency department for a federal installation. I'm also the founder of Discipleship in Motion, which is a women's discipleship group where we are discipling women in the things of God, discipling them that they may go out and make more disciples. So again, I'm just happy to be here and I look forward to the conversation.
Amen, sister. Thank you so much for being here today. And let me tell you something, guys. Every Wednesday before I go live, I connect to Remnant Community at church and I listen to their prayer and I connect with them. So, Tracy, thank you so much for letting me be part of your family. And we want to give a shout out to the pastor, Pastor Glassby. We love you. We are praying for you and our sister, Tina Letitia Hill. We love you, sister. Thank you for being the bridge to connecting all of us. So we are back to the program. Hot topic today. What is PTSD as we are celebrating the awareness this month of June? Pastor, for those who are wondering, asking themselves, or perhaps a little confused about what PTSD, can you let us know what it is?
Sure. So there's been a lot of discussion, right? Research about what this PTSD means or how it evolves. And some people think that it's not necessarily a disorder. Others think that it's just a variant of human response to trauma. And that's according to the National Alliance of Mental Health. But whether you're on one side or the other, you have to consider each one of these aspects, that there's a consequence of our body's inability to effectively return to what quote unquote is normal. Because usually the PTSD is a result of some traumatic experience or event in our lives. So before we get to what's PTSD, we need to, I think, identify first what acute stress disorder is. And I want to touch on that because usually for most of us, we fall into this category, acute stress disorder, which is a disorder that creates fear and certain symptoms that we experience soon after a traumatic event in our lives. And that traumatic event can be many different things, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But usually the fear and the anxiety tends to last about less than a month, no more than a month, right? And that's something, for example, we lose a loved one, right? That tends to take a few weeks of effect in us to sort of adjust ourselves to the loss. But usually after that 4 weeks, that month, we're able to sort of recuperate it and continue moving forward. But what happens is that for those who cannot return or stabilize themselves after those 4 weeks, eventually then they may be categorized under what today's topic is, which is PTSD. So the PTSD then comes in when those symptoms or that anxiety, that fear goes over that 4-week limit. And what we have to understand is that these symptoms don't necessarily show up immediately after the traumatic event. For some people, it can take weeks before signs begin to manifest in their lives. Some might be months, some might be years. What's interesting also that according to the studies, 80% of all the cases of acute stress disorder develop into PTSD. So symptoms of PTSD may begin either shortly after the traumatic event or, like I said, months afterward. Now, keep in mind also that there are what we know as stressors, right, which are factors or sort of red flags that appear in our lives in moments that are unexpected after that traumatic event. And those stressors or those red flags tend to create a sense of threat toward ourselves or toward our family, toward our loved ones. And once again, those traumatic events can be combat, which is one of the myths that we might touch on a little bit later. Many believe that it's only veterans that experience PTSD, and that is not true. Rape is a traumatic experience. Natural disasters here in Florida, we tend to have a lot of those with hurricanes. Airplane crash, a vehicle accident, death, as I mentioned, terrorism, which has been very active in our country for the past few years, or it can be something such as divorce. such as a loss of income, a loss of employment, or even something you did which eventually ended up in prison. So once again, the scope of traumatic events is wide. And depending upon how you respond to those traumatic events, then eventually you will fall into either that acute stress disorder or the eventual post-traumatic stress disorder. But once again, I just want to pinpoint that usually this is a result of some kind of traumatic event that the person experiences.
I am so glad you gave a few examples before we went deep in, because a lot of people do believe or have the mentality that only people that come back from combat or perhaps our vets are the only ones that experience PTSD, but that's just a myth, as we previously mentioned. So, Sister Tracy, who gets PTSD?
Well, anybody can get PTSD. You know, I was reading an article just earlier today that talked about PTSD can be even seen in children as early as 9 months old, 9 months old. So anybody can experience a trauma. So depending on how that person responds to that trauma, depending on how they internalize the trauma, depending on whatever types of resources are around them to help them to deal with the trauma, anybody is susceptible to developing PTSD.
And that is, I am so glad we're speaking on this topic today, because I think it is so important that we do not forget or even push to the side something that we are that we could experience at any moment in our lives, and it could affect us. And speaking of, Pastor, can you give us a few examples of the myths that we've been believing or perhaps hearing out throughout our lives?
Sure, but I want to piggyback on what the First Lady said, and I think she's right on. Right, this is anybody. This is not about color. This is not about race. Anybody, as long as you're walking this earth, you are going to be exposed to trauma at some point in your life, right? And I wanna highlight that, because the same way I just mentioned, it has to do nothing with demographics. It has nothing to do with spirituality either, right? You can be a full-blown, full-blown Christian, and you can still experience post-traumatic stress disorder, right? I'm a pastor. As long as I'm on this earth, I'm exposed to PTSD. Just because I'm a pastor doesn't make me any better than anybody else. At the end of the day, I bleed, I breathe, right? I have feelings, and I have to experience all this also. So this is why it is important for us to understand, because it doesn't matter whether you're in church or not in church, you are going to be exposed to trauma and therefore be prone to getting PTSD or experiencing PTSD, because statistics also show us that it affects at about 4% of the US adult population. And I'm glad the First Lady mentioned, because now research is showing that even at an early age, children, right, babies are experiencing, unfortunately, also statistics show that 10% of women have PTSD sometimes in their lives, compared to 4%. So women tend to be exposed more to PTSD than men. That has its reasons. I won't go into that. But talking about the myths. So one of the myths that I briefly mentioned is that it only happens to veterans, people of war. And that is incorrect. Just as the First Lady said it, and we'll continue repeating it, this can happen to anybody. Now, one of the other myths is that people with PTSD cannot function. That is absolutely false. So for those who are listening to us that may be experiencing PTSD, I want you to know that you're not alone, that there is hope, that there is help, right? That although you may be experiencing these symptoms, and at times it can be severe symptoms, with counseling, with medication at times, and support system, you can eventually adjust and live a healthy, fulfilling life. So PTSD not necessarily paralyzes you. There's hope, right? You can continue living a fulfilling life. Some people may think that it's all in the head. No, that's not true. Although it does affect the psychological component of our body or of our lives, it also affects our body. There's research that states that there can be some biological issues in people that experience PTSD, specifically their personality. Once again, this information is out there. I'm not going to go into detail, but once again, research shows that there are multiple reasons for why PTSD, besides the traumatic events, exist in our lives.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Concerning this PTSD, I don't know if you can answer this now, but why is it that two people can witness the same event and be affected by it in two totally different ways? One may potentially develop PTSD, and one may experience the trauma, but may be able to just to move on with their life as if nothing has happened.
That's a great question. So I want to start the answer off by this. That's why we cannot judge the book by its cover. Mm-hmm. Because we don't know what everybody's going through. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest errors that we do, and I want to make sure I say this right. So mm-hmm. when I say we, I'm not, I include everybody, mm-hmm. church people and non-church people, is that we say, oh, I went through that and I got over it. Why can't you get over it? Well, you're not in the person's shoes.
Right.
So the context of how that person experienced that traumatic event is different than how you experienced it. Okay. You may have the blessing of a support system. The other person may not have it. Mm-hmm. One person may have, for example, nowadays, everything has to do with insurance, right? We know low income families may not have the resources, the financial resources, or the insurance available to seek help. Therefore, it makes it more difficult to process the pain or the trauma. It could be cultural issues, right? Culture influences us a lot. And this is something, and I want to say this, I think I have to say this. So for us believers, we tend to believe more our cultural influences and teachings than what the word says. And that's when we get in trouble, because culture shows us, oh, just, and excuse the phrase, but suck it up, just keep going, don't worry about it, you're going to get over it. No, it doesn't happen that way, right? Because if that's the mentality we're taking, specifically from a church standpoint, we're in trouble, right? Because what we're doing, if we take that mentality, we are minimizing the pain that person is going through. Therefore, the person is going to conclude, well, if the church can't recognize my pain, who am I going to go to? And eventually that leads the person to depression, and eventually leads the person to suicide. So us as the church need to be more sensitive to people who are experiencing these mental challenges, because we just don't know, right? Not everybody is built the same. Right. Not everybody was raised the same. And it's that question is good, because let's take two siblings, a brother, sister, or sister, two siblings in the same household. People say, well, they were raised under the same household. Yes, but they experienced differently, right? So when the first sibling was born, all the attention was on that sibling. So the second sibling was born. Now the attention has to be divided. And maybe mom and the parents, they're working more, or they have more responsibilities. Therefore, the attention is not being given to the kids. So once again, culture, the way we were raised, the support systems, our financial status, all these are factors that affect the way one responds. Therefore, we cannot automatically say that, but I know such and such, or I went through it, I got over it in 3 weeks. You should be able to get over it. No, I'm sorry. We cannot express ourselves in that manner, because all we're doing is we're digging a hole deeper for the person to stay in. Right. And we're doing more damage than help. So hopefully that answers your question.
I have another question.
Sure.
Well, second question is there anything that an individual can do pre-trauma? Like, we don't know what trauma is going to come our way, but is there anything that we can do in advance to help guard us or build us up prior to that trauma? Does that question make sense?
So once again, I think so. Yes, it makes sense, and I think a lot of it has to do with your upbringing, the atmosphere in which you were brought up, because that's going. So that environment is what's going to teach you how to respond to stress or traumatic events. And I think a bonus there is if you're able to connect, because research says it, that when people are connected to a spiritual component, right, to that spiritual, whether it be a church, a faith-based organization, that faith-based organization or that connection to spirituality helps a person process that trauma or whatever negative event better. Right? It doesn't mean that it exempts them. No, it just gives them because that sense of hope exists when faith is included in a person's life. So once again, it all, I think it has to do with your upbringing and how spirituality connects to your life.
Okay.
Those are great questions and excellent answers. Thank you both for listening, just for participating, period. And I'm glad you said that, Pastor, because it is true. I remember while you guys were talking, I remember I started thinking about my upbringing and my childhood, and there were moments where it wasn't easy. We come from a very poor background. I remember eating bread and butter for dinner because that's all we had. And now I'm able to perhaps, buy myself a lobster. Now I'm blessed, But at the same time, no matter which position I was in, my mom would always tell me the power of the mind, Francesca. It's not about your surrounding. It's not about the plate of food or the brand on your clothing or your race or the way that you look. Is all about the power of the mind, how far you let things affect you. And if it's something that's out of your power, the fact that you have the strength to get help when it's needed, that alone is something to be proud of, So that being said, to Tracy, why is it so important that the church speaks on this topic, or perhaps educate themselves even further concerning this topic?
Because trauma can happen to any and everybody. And these are the congregants, these are the parishioners, these are the people who are going to be coming through the doors. And, and I think a prime example of this is that this past year, 2020, we've been in a season of pandemic. And a lot of people don't realize how traumatic this has been on a lot of people. And even throughout 2020, just think about everything else that has taken place on top of the pandemic. Think about the political atmosphere, the racial, police brutality. It's so much that has taken place in 2020. Now the church doors are going to be opening, and all these people who have experienced these different types of trauma may or may not have already sought help for, but now they're coming to church. They're coming to church, and these are the people who are going to be coming to the front door. So it makes sense that leaders are knowledgeable about PTSD, so they know how to deal. Not that they are the professional counselors, but they'll know how to receive these people, how to walk with them, how to encourage them, and how to be a support, because they're coming. They're coming.
Yeah.
Yes. And
just
go ahead, Pastor.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that. So listen, this is what we were called to do.
Yes.
To help people. Right. I believe, and I just had this conversation today with a young man. So, and I'm speaking to the leaders right now, and from leader to leader, right? For those of you who are listening to me, and I'm not going to apologize ahead of time for what I'm about to say, but I think I need to say this. So, if God has put you in a community, it's because God knows that you or your congregation has the talent and the ability to minister to the need of that community.
Yes.
And if you're not ministering to the need of that community, something's wrong.
Mhm.
And we need to finally realize and accept that mental health is an issue, a major issue that's happening in our neighborhoods. And we are turning our backs on people because we feel that this is not something that belongs to us. We want to pawn this off on the government agencies, on our local agencies, and we don't want to take the responsibility for ministering to the needs of the people. Now, so something that I also say is that one thing that this pandemic has made us, the church experts, is in food distribution.
Mm.
And that's great, but we've gotten stuck there, right? We've become so comfortable, and we believe that just giving a bag of food should be enough to justify and be able to to convince ourselves, oh, we give
Wow.
the bag of food, this is enough, right? We're good. We don't have to do it. No, no. And I agree with the first lady. Now is the time where the people are going to be filling our facilities that are in need of mental health. We cannot turn our backs on them, right? Statistics are telling us that 20% of the population is going through some kind of traumatic experience. You know, another, in preparation for this, I found an article. They did a survey in 21 different countries. And out of those 21 different countries, they focused on the frontline workers, right? The doctors, the nurses. First lady, you might be able to testify to this. The stress level and the levels of anxiety and depression is prevalent. It's about 22% within our frontline workers.
Mhm.
So once again, this is not about just soldiers. This is about everyday people experiencing these traumatic events. So, for example, here in South Florida, just a few days ago, we had half of a building collapse, which is not even 20 minutes from us. Half a building collapse right now. There's possibly hundreds of people that are going to be that have passed away. That's a traumatic experience. Now, one thing we have to understand is that we don't necessarily have to be in the middle of the traumatic event
Right.
to experience PTSD, right? Because we can experience PTSD secondhand,
Mhm.
right? So, for example, for myself, I wasn't in the event of the collapse, but the fact that I'm at a distance and just seeing the stressors and the traumatic event that's going on can affect me. So don't think that just because you may not be directly involved with the traumatic event, it's not going to hurt you. Yes, it can hurt you. So we need to be careful in how we address these issues. But I believe it's important also for the church because, number one, we have to acknowledge that it does exist, right? If we don't acknowledge that it exists, we're not going to be efficient in the way we help, in the way we minister. And I think we need to do exactly what we're doing tonight. Bring awareness, right? So the pastors and leaders that are listening to me, we need to open our doors. And if you're not capable of bringing this kind of topic, that's fine. And I can respect that, but don't deny that God has lifted up people with the knowledge and the wisdom to bring this information to your church. And I think then, and allow me once again, because I feel this needs to be said, that's why Hosea chapter 4 talks about the people perish for lack of knowledge, right? So if we start right there in that first verse, it talks about there is no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God in the land. And I think if we reject these people with mental health issue, we have no love.
Mm.
And if we have no love, we are rejecting God.
Wow.
And once we start rejecting God, then we start turning our backs on him. And when we start turning our backs on him because we don't want to deal with these issues, then we begin to reject people, the opposite of what God wants to do. Therefore, we begin to perish. And then we ask ourselves as leaders, why is my church dwindling? Why am I getting less and less? Well, you got to look at yourself in the mirror and ask, are you really dealing with the issues within the community that you're in? And the answer may be no. So once again, if we don't prepare ourselves to deal with these mental health issues, we are not loving. And if we are not loving, we are not doing what God wants us to do. Therefore, we're going to perish. So it's time to wake up and start working. I'll leave it at that.
You know, I think you're so right, Pastor. I think part of the issue, especially with the church, is that we try to over spiritualize things. And not only that, I think, like you said, because we have a lack of knowledge, we are afraid because this is a area that's unknown to us. And we're used to having all the answers. So now someone's coming to me with a mental health issue and I don't know how to deal with it. But instead of equipping myself as a leader to understand what the available resources are or how to direct somebody, I push them away and make them feel unwanted, or I just run. And that absolutely is not the answer. Because again, trauma can happen to anybody. All of us are exposed to some level of trauma, but I think it's so important, again, as leaders, that we educate ourselves on what it really means to have PTSD and how can we be a support to the congregants when they come. But I have one more question for you.
I'll try and answer.
Okay, because any and everybody is exposed to trauma. And we know that, I think you already said this, for it to be classified as PTSD, the symptoms or the signs and symptoms needs to be at least a month long. What can a person do when they are initially exposed to trauma to lessen the effect of that trauma so it won't turn into a post-traumatic distress disorder? How can they stop that or deal with the trauma?
So number one, you have to acknowledge that the issue exists, right? Because, and I think you hit the nail on the head. We tend to use, and there's a terminology that's called, we use spiritual bypass, right? Because what we do is we say, just pray it off. Don't worry, you're going to get through it. Just do a weekend fast. Don't worry about God's going to do it. Sometimes that's not enough. And I believe in the power of prayer, right? I'm a pastor. I believe in the word. I believe that we can declare a word and God can, restore somebody in a second like that. No problem. But if God doesn't do it, then what happens? Right. So then that's where, when you start noticing, so yes, there are certain symptoms that we need to look for. So for example, you may have excessive worrying or fear. You may feel sad. You may feel confused in your thinking or problems, let's say concentrating. You may have some extreme mood changes, maybe some prolonged, strong feelings of irritability and anger. You're getting to the point where you're avoiding friends or social activities. Maybe your eating habits have changed. Maybe your sleep patterns have changed. So if you're able to recognize this, the first thing you should do is seek help, right? And I'm hoping that you can go to your pastor, to your leader, and the leader will be able to lead you. If they can't help you, they can at least provide you a resource where you can go to. But once again, if you feel that you're experiencing any of these that I just mentioned, it is important to seek counseling as soon as possible. And if you're a member of a church, obviously seek that spiritual care, because I think just because you're praying for something or for freedom from that disorder doesn't mean that you can't seek a counselor, right? You can speak to a counselor and also pray at the same time, right? And I think they go hand in hand. So therefore, once again, if you feel that you are experiencing these symptoms, please seek help, professional help, as soon as possible. Don't be afraid to talk about it, because I know there's a stigma out there on mental health. A lot of people, and this has nothing to do, and this goes back to the experience Job had, right? Job had this experience, and all of a sudden his friends were claiming that he was on sin. So at times this has nothing to do with sin, right? So let's get that straight, all right? So once you acknowledge, seek help, hopefully professional help, and also spiritual help. And between those two, they would be able to help you create a support system. I think the support system is crucial for anybody going through any of these mental health issues at any time.
Okay.
Absolutely, and we have posted the national hotline as well as the website for U.S. veterans. If you're a veteran as well, we are talking to everyone that wants to listen. We are here for you. This is the platform letting you know that you're not alone and that we are here for you. Even if you just want prayer, even if
Right.
you just want guidance, hit us up. We are going to put our phone number down below. Our phone number is 855, if you could put it up for me, 855-978-6551. Hit us up. We want to help you get better. You can do it. Pastor, let me ask you this next question, and I want to thank everybody that's connected and sharing this very important conversation. How does PTSD affect one's behavior?
Well, it affects in several ways, and I mentioned a couple just a few minutes ago. But some of the symptoms, and this is where we have to be careful. That's why I said previously we can't judge a book by its cover, because once again we don't know how that person is processing that event. But some of the symptoms, if it's not addressed immediately, as the First Lady's question was, in being able to seek help, it can lead to depression. It can lead to increased anxiety. And some people even go into what we call a dual diagnosis, which eventually fall into substance abuse. So there might be a feeling of what we call stress and arousal. That's that what we call the fight or flight mood, right? So when you experience that traumatic event and days or weeks or months after, you're in that sort of anxiety mood, and sort of, you know, anything that could happen that would remind you of that traumatic event would automatically create that fight or flight mood within you. So it can be a smell, it can be a place that you're in, it can be a sound. So any of these things could automatically trigger your behavior based on that traumatic event, because it's reminding you. So what happens is that your brain sort of interprets automatically there's a danger happening, right? Because the flags or the factors are automatically being connected to the traumatic event. So your brain begins to interpret there's a situation that's dangerous. Then from a biological standpoint, your neurotransmitters in your brain, they begin to be released. They trigger and start firing the neurons in your brain, and which eventually releases chemicals throughout your body. And that's where the reaction comes in to that event or the flags, right? The stressors that are happening at the moment. You also at times may feel a disruption in your normal functioning. Once again, because the brain is constantly working. It's in that fight or flight mood. So it leaves us also with some ongoing symptoms. So what happens is that we either re-experience the event continuously, either through thoughts, through memories, which eventually can be turned into nightmares. For some people avoid, so our behavior becomes avoidance. We try to avoid activities that remind us of the traumatic event. Once again, so let's say a traumatic event happened in a mall. After that traumatic event, you don't want to go to the mall anymore. So you're trying to avoid. Your behavior now changes to that of avoidance. Your behavior also is, you have a reduced, what they call reduced responsiveness. So people feel detached from other people, or they simply just lose interest in activities. They rather stay home because they're scared that something may happen that once again could remind them of the traumatic event. It could be increased anxiety. It may be guilt. So, for example, if somebody was in an automobile accident with a passenger, the passenger passes away in the automobile accident, and you survive, there's what we call survivor's remorse or survivor's guilt, right? You begin to question yourself. Why not me? I should have died and not the other person. And you begin to question yourself. Therefore, your behavior begins to show that of one feeling guilt, and you become what they call hyper alertness, right? You're like looking everywhere, trying to find out who's around you, over exaggerating the situation at times. And also, as I mentioned earlier, you begin to eat poorly. You may even exercise less. Some people, once again, may go into smoking, drinking, and another area where it may affect your behavior is that you may become more irritable, more aggressive in your behavior than what you would usually be in an event that you wouldn't experience a traumatic event. So yes, there are multiple ways and areas in which your behavior is affected due to PTSD.
And that's why it's so important to speak about it, so it doesn't go further into other behaviors and crimes even. While you were thinking, you know what, I was personally affected. I come from the generation where I was in high school, and every time somebody would slam a door, Columbine. I was in high school when that occurred. So every time we would hear a loud noise, or even the alarm, or the anything that could cause us to jump up, even though we were far, but we had the second effect to us as students. And not only Columbine, but right after that, we suffered 9/11. And I remember exactly and vividly how I was sitting down in my classroom, and the teacher turns on the TV, and boom, we see everything happen. So I remember the school being on lockdown, not being able to communicate with my parents. We didn't have cell phones then. So I remember being traumatized at moments with those specific events that occurred at that time. And I could speak about it now. But it's crazy to think how we could be affected at any moment, whether it's at a traffic light, whether it's through a family member, whether it's even through church. Can you know what? And I want to ask this question, even though I know I was gonna direct it to I was gonna ask Pastor, but I would like both of you to answer this one. Can PTSD affect your spiritual life?
I'll let the First Lady go first.
Oh, my answer off the top of my head would be absolutely, because PTSD affects your thinking. It affects your perspective. It affects the way you take in. So it could even affect the way you see God. You begin to ask questions of why this happened, or why didn't you stop this, God, or why me? It's all kinds of questions that you can ask when you experience a trauma. And yes, it absolutely can affect you spiritually.
So yes, the short answer is yes, right?
Yes.
So I concur with the First Lady, and I want to share something that I strongly believe. You can't have healthy spirituality unless you have a healthy mentality. Mm-hmm. They both are connected. There's no way that you can be affected mentally and be able to focus on God, because your focus at that moment is on the traumatic event, mm-hmm. right? And I think that's where the support system, is crucial. So yes, healthy spirituality requires a healthy mentality, and once again, we need to be careful with those people who are experiencing these issues, because once again, it can sort of complicate itself, and eventually turn into what we call these dual diagnoses, where other things begin to happen in their lives.
Mm-hmm. I have a question, Pastor. How best could spiritual leadership walk alongside professional counselors when dealing with somebody, or being a support to somebody who has PTSD and who is actively seeking treatment?
I'm going to use an old cliche. They got to learn how to stay in their lane. So once again, if the pastor recognizes that he doesn't have the knowledge to help that person from a mental health standpoint, they need to be able to respect and honor the counselor for their talents and their abilities and allow them to minister or work with them.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, because the pastor can easily say, all right, we're going to pray about this, but the person really mentally is not in a state that they want to pray about it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the counselor has to do their job first and be able to help stabilize the person emotionally, which then opens the door to the spirituality component. So when it comes to dealing with people with mental health issues, if we start with the spiritual component, we lost them.
Mm.
And I'm a pastor, and I'm telling you, if we start with the spiritual component, we lost them. So that's why we have to meet them where they're at, right? We have to show empathy.
Mm-hmm.
We have to put ourselves in their shoes. And once again, so if I'm a pastor, which I am, and I have a person who can help this person or a counselor who can help this person in that area, I will give them their space. And this is where the connection, and this is up to the client really, if they want the counselor to have the conversation with their spiritual leader, because there's a confidentiality issue here. So just because the pastor says, I'm going to refer you to a professional counselor, that doesn't automatically give access to the pastor to the information the client is sharing with the mental health counselor. It can't happen unless the client or the person gives authorization to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So in that point, the pastor just needs to continue being there for the person, showing empathy. And I think this goes also, if I may, Francesca, because I think this question connects to also to family members who have, people who have family members who are experiencing PTSD. So what is it that they do, right? So we're talking about people that are experiencing PTSD, but what about the family members? How do they deal with it? So if you don't mind, I just want to share some ways that the family living with someone with PTSD can do. So number one, as I mentioned, is provide social support. One thing that we need to learn is not to pressure your loved one into talking, right? So you may sit with the person and say, listen, I'm here, just talk to me. Tell me what's going on. If the person says, listen, I just don't feel like talking. Oh, come on, I'm here. Blah, blah. No, if the person says, listen, I don't want to talk right now, respect that and give them their space. Don't force them to talk about a traumatic experience that they're not ready to talk about at the moment, because you're just going to make it worse. So the support system has to do with giving them the space to speak when they feel the need to speak. Continue doing normal things with your loved one, right? Go bike riding, go to the stores, go do a picnic, go to the park, go see a movie. Don't try and change things because the person is experiencing PTSD. Obviously, it's going to be up to the person if they want to engage, but don't try and change things around to trying to accommodate them based on what they're experiencing. Just continue to try and do things as normal as possible. But in this space of social support, we have to take care of our own selves. We have to learn how to manage our own stress. We have to learn to be patient. We need to educate ourselves on what this PTSD can do. And number two, we need to be a good listener. And this is something that I have experienced in my counseling sessions. Many people know within themselves what they have to do. They're just looking for somebody to listen to them. And so point number one, we provide social support. Number two, be a good listener. And being a good listener means, and this is what we cannot do, we cannot invalidate their feelings. For them, it's true. They experience it, so accept it as what they are presenting to you. Do not minimize it. Do not deny the feelings that they are sharing with you, and don't give ultimatums or make threats or demands. If you don't talk to me, I'm gonna leave you, and you're just gonna have to figure this out by yourself. No, that's not the attitude we need to take. So point number 3, we need to rebuild trust and safety. We need to express our commitment to the person. We need to keep our promises. We need to emphasize the strengths of our loved ones. And number 4, we need to anticipate and manage those triggers. Once again, we know that they experience a traumatic event. Now we know that there's going to be triggers that are going to happen. Therefore, as we go along and walk with them, if one of those triggers happens, it shouldn't take us by surprise. We just need to learn how to adapt to that moment that the person is experiencing that trigger. So hopefully that answers your question.
I thought it was great myself. If I must add, thank you so much for educating us in this subject, Pastor, and thank you so much, Tracy, for being here tonight. It's been such a blessing and such an eye opening for many of us to speak about it. These are subjects and topics that we must start speaking out loud. Let's not judge a book by its cover. Let's start loving for real. Let's love one another for real. No more judging, more loving. So you've heard it here at my ministry. Pastor, sister, First Lady, thank you so much for being here tonight. Everybody at home, thank you for watching. Make sure that you share this conversation with your loved ones, with your friends. And please, if you are seeking for help and don't know where to start, call us, hit us up at 855, here we go, the number 855-978-6551, or just listen, if you're shy like many of us are, hit us up through our email at myministry777@gmail.com. We love you, we care about you, and we just want you to keep on living and shining for the Lord. Until the next time, every last Wednesday of the month with our English segment, here we are going to talk about it. So I'll see you at the end of next month, and until next time, stay blessed and smile. God bless you.